Thank you also so much for being here today and for supporting the little during this crazy time. Drop your figure 4 over to the left of your space. Please find some movement here.
The numbers are telling us, and the data is telling us, that while we've made progress on increasing social distancing, that progress is not enough. It's important for you to know that I'm speaking to all of Colorado when I say that now is the time to stay at home.
Over the past 6 years, the world has changed, but I didn't seem to notice much except for what I saw on cable TV news and stories on social media feeds. But in 2020, life has been very different. At the end of 2019, a viral pandemic spread quickly around the globe, and now everyone is figuring out how to go about life 6 feet apart from one another.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
At the same time, the world became enraged by racial injustice.
This is what democracy looks like!
The intersection between the pandemic and racism quickly became very evident. As divergent communities came together. Regardless, none of our lives are remotely close to the routines we practiced before. Even though I live near 30 neighbors, my experience with self-isolation has been an eye-opener and a throwback to my childhood. I'm a baby boomer who grew up in the suburbs of Cheyenne, Wyoming. Everyone in the neighborhood knew each other because all the kids walked to Fairview Elementary School together. Hordes of my friends charged through one another's homes. Garage doors were always open. Basketballs thumped on the driveways, and skateboards clattered down Windmill Road Hill. After school, my friends and I sat in front of the TV watching The Adventures of Superman.
Up in the sky! It's a bird!
It's a plane!
It's Superman! Yes, it's Superman!
And learn that winning is better than losing, and being a strong individual is better than communism. At least for me, self-isolation has been a wake-up call that maybe we've taken our sense of connection to one another for granted. Are we now having to reimagine Superman's American way? In 2014, I was almost dead from an exotic fungal disease called pneumocystis pneumonia. It's the same disease that killed thousands of people during the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s.
You've tested positive for HIV. Have you ever used intravenous drugs? Have you ever engaged in homosexual conduct?
Homo. You say homo? You made a mistake.
I didn't have AIDS, but my immune system was mega compromised, likely from working too much. It may also have been a genetic disposition, since my dad died after a bout with a similar lung condition. I didn't think my life would be so drastically altered that I'd end up joining a yoga studio to regain my strength and calm myself down a bit from health-related anxiety. Other than being at 90% lung capacity, I'm pretty much back to full speed. I attribute my recovery in part to yoga.
And now the spinal twist.
But mostly, it was about being around my neighbors who have chosen to intentionally provide neighborly support to one another in the Silver Sage Village co-housing community. Shortly after getting back to health, I wondered what some of my neighbors thought about living together at Silver Sage. Those interviews were the basis for a documentary entitled Aging Gratefully: The Power of Community. It's about how and why social interaction among neighbors growing old together nurture better mental and physical health while being a hedge against loneliness.
Live here. This is a commune. We prefer intentional community. We're not a bunch of hippies sitting around playing guitar. Look at it. Welcome to the Elysium community.
It's not like we're signing a lease. We'll give it a month.
2 weeks.
Before the pandemic, I went to yoga a few times a week, but like every place else, the yoga studio closed, but soon reopened online. I've been practicing more now in the privacy of my web camera than I did before. Plus, I don't have to take the extra 30 minutes to get back and forth from there.
As you exhale, draw knee to nose, belly in, and hover. Inhale up and back.
The coronavirus disease was first described by the World Health Organization before it spread quickly around the globe, including to Boulder, Colorado.
So the name of the disease is COVID-19, that's coronavirus disease 19. And the reason for choosing the name, I think the Director General pointed out what certain principles are when you name the disease. Coronavirus is a group of viruses that's quite common. There are already many known human strains of corona and many animal strains of corona. So it is possible that in the future there'll be another strain of coronavirus. You need a common terminology and also to avoid a number of different stigmatizing or other forms of confusing names.
I wondered how my neighbors were coping with self-isolation and decided to update the Aging Gratefully documentary during the COVID-19 pandemic. I arranged visits with my neighbors about their experiences living in community and how their lives have changed. We agreed to meet in a web-streamed Zoom room. Margaret Porter retired from the federal government and moved to Boulder with her husband Dan Nifong, who was a college professor.
I wasn't looking for community. I was looking mostly for a place where it would be easier to get around I definitely wanted a smaller metropolitan area, which is why I said Boulder, because Boulder is kind of ideal. I wasn't looking to be in any kind of communal relation with other people. I was kind of intrigued by it, but not strongly attracted to it. What I didn't expect was the difficulty in reaching a common understanding of what community meant, from participation to behavior to how we are in community. People have very different ideas. And as the eldest kid in, a large Catholic family, my highest value was play well with others and suppress all conflict. That's what I learned as a kid. Well, those strategies don't necessarily work in community when other people don't share that.
Henry Kroll originally wanted to start a co-housing community in San Francisco, where he lived at the time with his wife, Jean.
And we had been visiting Boulder because we've had friends here. Jeannie's best friend from San Francisco now lives in Boulder, and she was just here this morning visiting Jean at Manor Care, where we're located. It's a skilled nursing home for long-term care for Jeannie.
I'm now 77 years old, and at the age of 64, my wife, who's now deceased, and I made the decision to move to Boulder, Colorado, and become pioneers in Silver Sage Village, which is one of the first senior co-housing communities established in the United States, one of the very few that are have been founded as such, to be designed, managed, and directed by the residents, who are all seniors.
John Heiler retired from professional meeting facilitation. He and his wife Deanne are longtime Boulder residents who moved from the far western end of Yellow Pine Avenue to Silver Sage, which is on the far opposite end of the street.
The question is whether we were specifically looking for co-housing or just a place to move to in conjunction with downsizing, and the answer is the latter. But it helped that we had had a background over 20 years of thinking about co-housing, being aware of it. We had visited Nylands, which is near here, and knew about Nomad and the various other places. But we had no sense at that time about the dimensions of the co-housing movement in the United States.
Co-housing is, in those contexts, dictates again whom you're going to have to spend and get to spend a whole lot of time in a way that wouldn't be the case if you live in an apartment in New York City and maybe don't know your neighbors. If you live way out in the middle of nowhere in a rural setting and don't have any neighbors, or if you live in a suburban environment where in much modern housing you actually drive into your house because you use a clicker and the door opens and then you don't see anybody.
Jim Leach was the Silver Sage Village land developer. He and his wife Brownie have been in Boulder for a long time and chose to live in co-housing after being involved with building over 20 other communities around the country.
It's an attempt to by creating community with your neighbors, creating an aging and community kind of situation that can be more supportive. And so I think it's got a tremendous future, but it's also it's a complex product, and it's not something that the American business responds well to, the typical development business, but in general, our whole American model is to figure out something that works and then just mass produce the heck out of it. And this is a small scale kind of product to start out with.
I often tell them the old co-housing joke about it's the longest and most expensive personal growth workshop you'll ever take. And if that doesn't set them back, then we talk about the advantages of being connected with other people and what community can do in so many different ways in your life, both from a mental and physical health standpoint all the way to the kind of social capital it generates by connecting people at a deeper level.
The newest member of Silver Sage Village is Ann Miles. She relocated to Boulder from Maryland to be closer to her son.
So I spent several days looking at houses, including the condo that I'm in here at Silver Sage. And I wasn't set on co-housing when I was looking around, but once I saw this place and met people, I decided it was really what I wanted.
Silver Sage Village, like all other co-housing communities, are set up for intentional interaction. How does that work? We all own our own homes, but have agreed to jointly manage and maintain shared spaces like the courtyard gardens and the common house. Katie McCammett and Chuck Durrett are considered the original pioneers who brought the co-housing concept from Denmark to the United States. Both reside in the Nevada City co-housing community located in Northern California.
You have to believe that you can have a richer and more interesting life by working with other people, and therefore it's worth working with other people. And I think it does not work very well for people who like hierarchy and clear rules.
I live, in a co-housing neighborhood of 34 homes. So it's something in the range of 90 to 100 people. And what I think it really does for me is I know all my neighbors, and I can tell you their stories too. I know where they came from, I know their families, I know what they're involved in.
In many ways, it's reminiscent of a small town where you know each other, and again, you care about each other and you support each other.
The common denominator for sure is that the residents who live in co-housing believe that by giving cooperation the benefit of the doubt, at least entertaining the possibility on any given line item, their own life might be more convenient, more practical, more economical, more interesting, more fun, more healthy.
I also wondered if there was any updated research about how people age and how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected seniors, particularly those who live in co-housing. Angela Bryan is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Her research about whether social interactions and physical activity improve our well-being as we age was the basis of another documentary memoir.
But the challenge in adding all those extra years to life is to make them quality years, right? So how can we keep people functioning independently, being able to do all the things they enjoy, and having a high quality of life as they get into older and older ages? But there's been really interesting work on the impact of physical activity on aging and on the aging process. So we were really interested in seeing if we could use physical activity as maybe a tool to help older adults increase their quality of life.
In addition to my doctors, little did I realize that living in an intentional community would end up saving my life. I really didn't know much about co-housing, except intellectually. I knew we all owned our own condos, went to a lot of meetings, and had potluck dinners a couple times a week. And that was about it. I didn't understand the reason for co-housing until I got up from my deathbed. Had this glimpse into the future about what I might be like when I was unable to walk, and when I was on supplemental oxygen and I was unable to, wipe my butt.
I am in the presence of the spirit of Christmas yet to come.
Fortunately for myself, I recovered. That horrific experience set me up for dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. If I can get over being tethered to an oxygen bottle for several months, I can handle wearing a protective mask every now and again. While I thought there would be a high level of consensus around balancing individual self-interest with the good of the whole, my neighbors held more diverse points of view on this topic than I thought.
I personally chose just to wear a mask whenever I go outside because I don't want to upset my neighbors. But there are some people who don't wear masks when they go outside routinely, but the expectation on the part of some was we would use masks when we were in our own courtyard. And for some people, myself included, that was really difficult. So I worry that there's an underground of concern that's not expressed, that is harming our community.
It happens that one of our residents and neighbors and friends is a full-time practicing nurse. She brought to us in a very methodical and responsible way a major heads up about what she was thinking about and worrying about as a professional in that field. And you can go down to the Common House today, 2.5 months later, and you'll see that flip chart with what she said back then. And darned if it isn't mostly right.
I do think it was wise, even though in our community we've got some risk tolerance differences. I think we've done a good job of setting up something that seems to work for everyone in one way or another, even though people don't all apply it exactly the same.
And importantly, I think what people don't fully appreciate is that putting a mask on yourself is more to prevent you from infecting someone else. And if everybody does that, we're each protecting each other.
People that are fearful and are mindful that they of their vulnerabilities. I'm in a place where I'm fairly healthy. I think most of our residents are active and are able to go for walks and enjoy going for walks.
So we had an actual advantage by virtue of having a organized community and having one of our number be concerned about how the virus would impact her and us and our families. We had a huge advantage of having that level of expertise and the forum.
I think getting back to a position where everybody's comfortable, accepting the differences, the levels of anxieties and fears.
It's more efficient to prevent transmitting to others than it is to prevent transmission to yourself. But you can completely cover that ballpark if essentially universally when people go out and are in a situation where they might come into closer contact, that they wear that mask.
With the pandemic, you begin to rethink these things and say, yeah, we can do it. I mean, hell, if we can figure out how to get through this mess we're in, we can probably solve a lot of those other problems, and we can find better ways. So that's inspiring, I think, in a way, at least if you either do that or you sit around and worry about it a lot. We already had ways to communicate in place. We just switched to electronic.
Our storage units were a mess. So the Common House team organized a cleanup day of the storage units. As we cleaned out our storage units, we would pick out an item there that we wanted to tell our friends about. So this is Alan doing show and tell. And Alan, can you tell us what this is?
These dolls that were given to me by my grandfather when I was born. I was born on May 2nd, and there's Boys' Day was on May 1st.
We knew each other. We had certain protocol that you develop over years with immediate neighbors.
Actually, I'm wondering if I maybe am getting to know people a little more through even with these restrictions, that we're all making a little more of an effort to talk to one another. And I felt very welcomed as a new person.
I count my blessings every day that my wife died a year ago and is not in a nursing home today. I know of individuals that the only way they could see their spouse in a nursing home is on a call like this that could last maybe 20 or 15 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week at the most.
Nobody expected that the world would come to a grinding halt because of a microscopic critter. Suddenly, thousands of people found themselves stranded in faraway places. Millions lost their jobs overnight. And everyone was self-isolated at some point in their homes, if they had one.
It's actually a little crazy because I came the end of January, and then I was gone the entire month of February on a hiking trip in Patagonia. And at the time I was gone, we heard there was talk of Wuhan and what was going on in China, but really it didn't affect my trip at all. So it was surprising when I got back here, the very end of February, that things changed within a week. So I really only had 2, maybe 3 weeks at most where we were doing community meals, and it was the more typical way of being here at Silver Sage before the shutdown as a result of the pandemic.
We were in California when the governor declared a state of emergency there because of COVID. So we worked our way back home. So we got here, I think, on the 11th of March. And by that Sunday, the community was already talking about, having to eliminate outside visitors, to close the guest room, to eliminate outside meetings. And so I think the community, because of the vigilance of some of our members, was really pretty far ahead.
The pandemic amplified the need for connection. Governments at all levels ordered residents to stay at home.
Hello, I'm Boulder Mayor Sam Weaver, and I'm here today to speak about mitigating the impact of the novel coronavirus on the Boulder community. Like every place in the world, Boulder is experiencing a pandemic event, which is unlike anything seen at this scale in over a century.
The effects of isolation are largely unknown, except anecdotally.
And while social isolation has increased and distancing has increased, it's not yet reached the number that we need to save lives and contain the spread of the virus, which is why we are resorting to this measure, this extreme measure, at this time to make sure that people know that they need to stay in their homes whenever possible.
Loneliness is an unintended consequence of COVID-19.
And we're focusing more, I think, on the whole process of aging. A lot of us got involved in this because we really wanted to, we were in our early to mid 60s, and we wanted to kind of figure out what's the rest of the journey. How do we learn from each other? How do we get deeper into not only our relationships, but our spirituality and that sort of thing.
I think I was really thinking of it in relation to where I came from, because it was a pretty big deal for me I'd lived in the Maryland, Washington, D.C. area for my entire life, really. So to pick up and leave out here.
You get involved in community, and there's all the day-to-day stuff and then you have all your other distractions. So it's a slow process. I think we've made a lot of progress through the years at Silver Sage, and you know, I'm proud of our community as a model of aging in place.
I lived in a community that was pretty neighborly, but I just think this was significantly different for me.
Very life-changing, life-challenging course where my wife was living with Alzheimer's, and for the first 7 years she was very active and part of the community, but needed eventually more and more care, and was in a nearby home where many people were living with dementia and other long-term chronic conditions.
Being active isn't necessarily all that rewarding, right? So they do it, they know it's healthy, but it's not fun. And so doing physical activity with people, making an appointment to, you know, go for a walk with people, making an appointment to meet a friend for a hike, doing physical activity in a social setting can make it a lot more rewarding than slogging through it on your own.
You know, being such a newbie, I have gotten to know people pretty well through these activities, and it's really kept me going, of not feeling isolated or lonely or bored. And sometimes I talk to my friends back in Maryland and they'll say, I'm so bored, or I'm feeling so isolated, and I haven't. So I've appreciated that aspect of being in community.
You know, I'm good for about 3 Zoom calls a day, and actually have about 3 Zoom calls a day, but they are with people and about topics that are hugely variable. One's a poetry group. There's a lot of political advocacy things that I'm part of. So my amount of stimulus and interaction includes co-housing, but is not limited to co-housing.
And moving slowly, your inhale, lift your torso, draw your arms up and overhead to crescent. So always working the pose from the ground up.
Exercise is really just part of that whole system of health behaviors that we try to encourage people to engage in to decrease the potential for inflammatory effects, because it's that low-grade inflammation happening all the time. That's what makes us sick.
My Silver Sage Village neighbors are closely knit, and that resulted in a fairly rapid response to the national and Colorado emergencies declared in mid-March. Only now was there any mainstream notice because of our personal, real-world experiences with self-isolation. Self-isolation has amplified loneliness, with most face-to-face interactions limited largely to household members. Co-housing communities provide a hedge against loneliness.
You've got the enormity of this death-delivering phenomenon globally. It sort of puts one's little perspective in the proper context among 6.5 billion people, or whatever the planet's population is, and our worries and things that we think are important pale in some extent to the distress that's really out there.
We have 3 times a week, we have check-in phone calls at 5 o'clock. Then Dan and I usually participate in, I like those calls. Sometimes there are only a few people on, sometimes there's a lot of people on.
It's really fun for me as a new folks to hear all the history and see all the people.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear these names, and now I finally have a face that I've seen.
Yes, you can picture what they look like.
I really miss physical contact. And I find that it's harder to engage in deeper conversation. So I would say for me personally, the connection feels, it's certainly different, and overall it feels less.
And then, of course, just being connected made a lot of difference, I think, especially for people our age. I think it, like I said before, it really, it's been proven to be very instrumental in people's health, both physical and mental health. And I think the fact that we have been and we've spent years together connected gives people a lot of strength.
We've had a lot of turnover in our community and some great new people join. This is quite recent for us. But with COVID, we don't have the same mechanisms that we've relied on in the past for integrating people. And I think that our new people are suffering, and I think our community is suffering for that.
I think I've gravitated a little bit to some of the newer people who, as we get to know each other, and we haven't all settled into what our routines are, so we're sort of finding our way and enjoying spending time with one another.
Co-housing communities are set up for neighbors to sit around the table in a host of meetings about how to manage the various community functions, prepare weekly dinners, and otherwise socialize. COVID-19 changed the way those interactions happen. In addition to virtual yoga, I've been spending a lot of time in online Zoom rooms working on this movie, refining screenplays, and writing another book. I've met some really great people from around the world and hope to see them in person one day once this COVID-19 pandemic is resolved.
One of our Zoom calls, I mentioned that we ask each other, what are you doing? What's going on in your day? And I said, well, I'm doing a drawing a day from a book that gives prompts about such things as, I'll give you a couple examples because they're really quite fun. Draw Van Gogh's The Starry Night with a new twist. They're the type of things where there can be lots of interpretation. Anyway, one of the other residents said, oh, I'd like to do that too.
Starry Night with a Twist. I really enjoyed doing this one. And the twist was, there's a little person sitting there in the mountain meditating. Conversation starts surrounding it, and I think she's gotten to know us a little bit better. So it's pretty nice. So a topic a day. You send it out. Whoever wants to draw it draws it and shares it via the iPhone, takes a picture, and it leads wherever.
And I send the prompt out each morning, and you don't have to do it, but most of us do each day, and we now share them. And I'm not an artist, but I like to draw, and I get joy out of drawing. And some other people are artists. I mean, their career has been to be an artist. It's a diverse group as far as those kinds of things and probably our skills, but to me it's been a great joy, and I think for the other people that are doing it also, it's nice. What's interesting is when I moved here, I thought I would do some of the things that I was doing back in Maryland, take an art class. I had lost my spouse died, and I about a year and a half ago find a grief group, which I had been participating. And given that we couldn't do anything in person, being able to do these things in our community has been really nice.
I teach a movement practice in a system called gyrotonic gyrokinesis, and I've taught for years in our exercise area downstairs, and Silver Sagers come, outside folks come, and I've moved those classes online actually with your help. I got an external camera, and teaching online is very different. It's more demanding. But it has allowed me to continue both my own practice and a number of people come, so I think it's really valuable.
It's clear that the world won't return to the way things used to be. The high level of unseen social and economic connectedness among diverse groups of people weren't really noticed until we became disconnected. Since I started making this movie, a consequence that came to light is that of racial injustice. People of color are disproportionately afflicted by COVID-19. Remember a movie called A Day Without a Mexican? Multiply that by the number of service workers you encounter on a day-to-day basis.
It is a state of emergency.
We have lost our dignity.
It's the beginning of the apocalypse.
We have lost our Mexicans.
A day without a Mexican.
Every explanation needs to be considered.
Forget about parking your cars at valet. Forget about getting a glass of water at the restaurant.
I had to call people that were in the black market, people from the 70s. Now they're selling fruits and vegetables. I had to risk my life for tomatoes. Then I came here, the place was a mess. I had to wash a dish.
On top of that, George Floyd was killed by 4 Minneapolis police officers. The news cycle then evolved into the civil disobedience pandemic and pushed COVID-19 off the front pages. That's where we are today, from the international level down to individual neighborhoods. This is Yellow Pine Avenue. One of my across-the-street neighbors at Wild Sage Cohousing is a city councilman. What will be the new normal? Will there be a new, reinvented American way?
Superman, who can change the course of mighty rivers, bend steel in his bare hands, fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way.
In theory, cohousers are square pegs fitting into Superman's American way, round holes.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
They take square cartridges. The ones on the limb are round.
Tell me this isn't a government operation.
This just isn't a contingency we've remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole. Rapidly.
I think, especially in cultures like our Western culture in the United States, where we are so damn independent, and we've gotten used to being able to live quite comfortably by being that way.
It's a welcome change for me from the world, which feels like a very me world, to really being able to think, what can I contribute? What will I get from it? And what can we as a community do to make this what we want?
I think there definitely is a role for cohousing in helping lead our life together in more meaningful ways.
Most, if not all, cohousing communities have as a social value one of diversity and inclusion. The recent murders of black men and women suddenly made this more real. Communities, including Silver Sage Village, are more curious about how they can be better allies for racial justice. We'll be watching a series of topical movies and documentaries, followed by candid conversations in a Zoom room, starting with I Am Not Your Negro by James Baldwin.
If any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
that the wider society has learned the imperative of connection. If you look at Yo-Yo Ma's Songs of Comfort or all the way the artists are connecting.
COVID-19 will provide more impetus for people to be creative about who they live with, where they live, and thus, and the type of community it is, and thus where they spend their time and energy.
People are connecting by the millions on whether it's Facebook or Reddit or Instagram or whatever, all the social media sites. Whether that will translate to being in a physical community, I'm not so sure.
Co-housing communities make decisions by consensus rather than by competitions that result in winners and losers.
I mean, I've chosen to live here because I believe in being cooperative, being collaborative, and in making decisions that we come to better solutions if we're listening to different points of view. And I would really wish that for the wider world.
I think we've gotten deeper into the how we're connected and understanding how we're connected as we've kind of battled our way through this thing over the last couple of months.
And sometimes there's still points of disagreement, but by and large, I think we've done a very, very responsible job. And if this kind of thing had been done more on a national level, I think other states and communities and all would be better off.
It's a great experiment with our co-housing. We knew it was an experiment. And my late wife had a phrase that she wrote down that she wanted to do: enduring work for good. That was her life motto. So I'm on that path. I think that's a path that our community's on.
Achieving these ideals is easier said than done. But co-housing is well suited to redefine Superman's American way. As for myself, being an introvert made self-isolation for me a seamless lifestyle transition, since I spend a lot of time in front of this computer screen anyway.
The coronavirus just put it in the table in a very raw and very critical way. They say co-housing is a must for the future.
Before COVID-19, I had chosen more privacy for my co-housing community to devote more time reconnecting with my outside world friends and family. My Kentucky Derby birthday party on May 2nd was canceled.
Historic Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky comes alive with splendor as 100,000 spectators witness the 79th renewal of the storied Run for the Roses. Who will it be in 53? Well, at post time, the undefeated native dancer, number 1, is the odds-on favorite. That's Dark Star on the rail, holding on. Native dancer is closing fast. Dark Star is driving. Native dancer is catching him. Dark Star holds on and is whipped under the wire to win by a head over Native Dancer. Invigorator is third, with Royal Bay Gem finishing fourth.
Even though the big race was scratched, we did get to view the first annual running of the Coronavirus Derby.
And they're off. Out of the gate, it's coronavirus, followed closely behind by Wuhan-style lockdown. On the outside, it's global pandemic working hard against flatten the curve. Social distancing got off to a slow start.
But I was still able to connect on Zoom with 100 or so of my college classmates, long-lost family members, and colleagues from my past lives. I was beginning to volunteer more at Silver Sage Village, especially with all the new faces around. But here it is 5 years later, and COVID-19 pushed me back into my shell.
Press yourself up into a comfortable seated position. Drawing the palms together at the space right before the heart into Anjali Mudra.
This time around, not so much by choice, but because I'm a member of the most vulnerable population. I'm old, recovered from a lung disease, and I'm a guy with A-positive blood type. How long this continues is anyone's guess. But be respectful and think about how your public health choices during this pandemic affect others.
Yeah, he says very similar green beans. You can grill them, throw them in a pan with lemon, olive oil or something. All right, you're all set.
Regardless of what your self-isolation experiences have been like, I hope they're memorable ones.
Balancing here, body with mind, mind with heart, and heart with breath. Thank you all so much for sharing your practice this morning. Namaste.
And they're off. Out of the gate, it's coronavirus, followed closely behind by Wuhan-style lockdown. On the outside, it's global pandemic working hard against flatten the curve. Social distancing got off to a slow start, but he's now neck and neck with flatten the curve. On the inside, it's just a little flu, followed by trust the experts. As they pass the quarter pole, 18 months vaccine is working hard to get past Plaquenil. Dr. Fauci is 3 lengths back of the leaders. Stimulus plan is trying to squeeze by PPE as they enter the backstretch. But out on the outside, here comes economic shutdown. Open by Easter, gets bumped a little bit by Dr. Fauci. Flatten the curve and economic shutdown are battling it out as they head past the half-mile pole. Distance learning stumbled out of the gate, and it looks like he won't be able to get back into it. Not his day today, folks. They are moving at a brisk pace and all clustered together except for my bank account, which is way back of the pack. He might be injured. They might have to pull him up. Toilet paper is nowhere to be seen. He's lost in the pack. As they head into the far turn, it's social distancing still in the lead, but Daily Briefing is lurking 1.5 lengths back. It's a tremendous race, folks. I've never seen anything like it. And now, Cure Worse Than the Disease is starting to make his move. As they enter the top of the stretch, cabin fever is charging hard, but social distancing is holding him off. Economic shutdown is still looking strong, and he's nose to nose with Cure Worse Than the Disease. And on the inside, here comes Dr. Fauci, and down the stretch they come. It's social distancing and economic shutdown now neck and neck. I don't believe it. Dr. Fauci is trying to keep pace, and with 1 furlong to go, it's economic shutdown, social distancing, and Dr. Fauci. And as they come to the wire, it's... oh my God, it's no one fucking knows by a head. Oh, an incredible race, folks. 11-7-12 trifecta pays 117.39. Woo!